Eleanor's mind the gradual erosion of his sense of reality, as if the house itself were conspiring against him. Every groan of its timbers, every shift of its shadows, seemed to echo Eleanor's disdain, until he could no longer tell if the dread he felt was hers or the house's own ancient malice. He had no proof, no witnesses. Harold, when present, saw only the carefully curated performance of domestic harmony. Eleanor would fuss over Marcus's plate at dinner, asking if he was eating enough, her eyes glinting with private amusement. "You look tired, Marcus," she'd say, her tone dripping with false concern. "Are you sleeping well in that drafty attic?" Harold would beam, seeing only a loving wife trying to bridge the gap with his son. Marcus would stare at his peas, the welts on his back throbbing beneath his shirt, and muttered that he was fine. The abuse was not constant. That was its own particular torture. There were days, sometimes weeks, of eerie calm, where Eleanor would ignore him completely, moving through the house like a ghost. These respites were almost worse, fraying his nerves with anticipation. He began to map the cycles of her cruelty against Harold's travel calendar, the phases of the moon, the weather searching for a pattern, a logic, anything to make it feel less random and insane. By the spring of 2024, the house had become a prison. Eleanor had taken to locking the pantry and the refrigerator. She installed a cheap, keyed lock on the thermostat cover. Marcus, who worked with his hands, could have picked or broken these flimsy barriers, but doing so would trigger a more violent, unpredictable retaliation. He learned to keep protein bars and cans of soda hidden in his room, his sanctuary now feeling less like a refuge and more like a cell. The physical violence evolved. The wooden spoon and belt were joined by a rubber-tipped walking cane she'd needed after a fictitious fall. She would aim for the soles of his feet, the backs of his knees, places the marks wouldn't show. Her attacks were methodical, cold, and always preceded by a chillingly calm justification. "This is for your own good," she'd whisper as the cane came down. "You need structure. You need to be broken of your arrogance." One rainy April night, Harold called to say his trip to Philadelphia was extended. Eleanor hung up the phone and turned to Marcus, who was reading a motorcycle magazine on the sofa. Without a word, she walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt with a definitive clunk, and pocketed the key. Then she walked to the landline phone in the hall and unplugged it. Marcus's cell phone was in his jacket, hanging in the hall closet, a closet she now stood in front of, arms crossed. "You think I don't know you've been talking to your father," she said, whispering, trying to turn him against me. "I haven't said a word," Marcus said, his voice low, fists clenched at his sides. "Liar," she smiled. "A lie deserves silence." For the next 48 hours, Marcus was a ghost in the house. She followed him from room to room, her presence a suffocating pressure. She would not let him sleep. If he dozed off in his chair, she would drop a pan in the kitchen or start the vacuum cleaner outside his door. The circles under his eyes deepened into bruises. On the second night, delirious with exhaustion, he finally snapped. "What do you want from me?" he roared, surging to his feet in the living room. Eleanor didn't flinch. She set her teacup down carefully. "I want you to understand that this is my house. You are a guest here, a tolerated guest, and guests can be evicted." Her eyes travelled to the steep, uncarpeted attic stairs. Permanently, the unspoken threat hung in the air. Who would question an old woman if her clumsy stepson took a tragic fall? The local police saw Eleanor Hargrove as a pillar of the community. They would see Marcus as the troubled, divorced mechanic living in his stepmother's attic. That moment broke something in him. Not his spirit, but his paralysis. He realized he was not just fighting an abusive stepmother. He was fighting the narrative she was meticulously crafting around him, the narrative of the unstable, ungrateful stepson. To survive, he needed. The opportunity came unexpectedly. In June, Harold announced a 2-week consulting project in Chicago. A deep, instinctual dread settled in Marcus's gut. 2 weeks alone with Eleanor felt like a death sentence. He had to act. He bought a cheap, pen-sized digital voice recorder from a tech shop in the city. He tested it, ensuring it could pick up clear audio from his pocket. His plan was simple: document the verbal threats, the insults, the admissions. It was a start. Eleanor's campaign began the moment Harold's taxi vanished. She started with the usual psychological warfare, moving his tools, accidentally throwing away a sandwich he'd made, making snide comments about his dead mother. The recorder in his breast pocket captured it all. But on the third night, she escalated beyond his worst fears. She cornered him in the narrow, dusty hallway that led to the basement. The single bare bulb overhead cast long, grotesque shadows. "You've been sneaking around," she hissed. "Buying things, hiding things. Do you think I'm a fool?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, trying to sidestep her. The recorder felt like a burning coal against his chest. She shoved him, hard, against the wall. The back of his head cracked against the wainscoting. "You are a thief. A snake in my garden. You're trying to steal my husband, my home, my life." She was screaming now, spittle flying. She grabbed a heavy, glass candlestick from a side table. Marcus's blood ran cold. This was different. This was unfiltered rage, a madness he hadn't seen before. "Eleanor, put that down," he yelled, raising his arms. "I should have done this years ago." She shrieked and swung. He ducked. The candlestick shattered against the wall, showering them with glass. In the chaos, the recorder fell from his pocket and clattered to the floorboards. Its red recording light a tiny, accusatory eye in the dim light. Everything stopped. Eleanor stared at the device. Her rage evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, calculating calm. She looked from the recorder to Marcus's horrified face. A slow, terrible smile spread across her lips. "So that's your game," she whispered. She bent down, her joints creaking, and picked it up. She held it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a dead insect. Clever boy, but not clever enough. She dropped it to the floor and brought her heel down, crushing it with a sickening crunch of plastic. "Karma. You have no proof," she said softly. "And now, you have no hope." What happened next was a blur of pain. She didn't use the broken candlestick. She used her fists, her nails, her feet. He didn't fight back, not physically. He was too stunned, too defeated. He curled into a ball as the blows rained down, his mind screaming one single, coherent thought: "She will kill me. Next time, she will kill me." The beating left him with a cracked rib, a split lip, and a galaxy of bruises. He told Harold, who returned home tanned and relaxed from Chicago, that he'd taken a bad fall working on his bike in the garage. Harold clapped him on the shoulder, told him to be more careful, and offered to help him change the oil on the weekend. The normalcy of it was a knife in Marcus's heart, but the destroyed recorder had an unintended effect. It shattered his last illusion of a peaceful resolution. He was in a war, and he was losing. He needed a new strategy. He needed to turn the house's own shadows against her. He began to observe Eleanor not as a tormentor, but as a subject. He noticed her routines, her small superstitions. She was terrified of the basement, a damp, stone-walled space she never entered. She would hurry past its door. She had an almost religious devotion to a particular porcelain figurine of the angel on the mantelpiece, dusting it daily. And she had a tell when she was lying to Harold. She would touch her throat, just above her collarbone. Marcus also started researching. He spent his lunch breaks at the public library, digging through old microfiche of the Eldridge Gazette. He learned that the Victorian had been built in 1890 by a stern, reclusive sea captain named Abner Highgrove, a distant relative of Eleanor's first husband. The captain's wife, Lydia, had died young in the house under mysterious circumstances. The gossip columns of the time hinted at isolation, melancholy, and a severe disposition on the captain's part. A connection sparked in Marcus's mind. The abuse wasn't just Eleanor's invention. It was a pattern, a sickness in the house's very foundations, passed down like a cursed heirloom. Eleanor wasn't just a cruel woman. She was a conduit for something older and darker. His plan formed, a desperate and dangerous gambit. He would use the house's history and Eleanor's own fears against her. He would make her believe the shadows she commanded had finally turned on their master. Harold left for a week-long trip to Portland in October 2024. The autumn wind howled around the eaves, and the old house groaned like a living thing. Marcus, his body healed, but his resolve steeled, set his plan in motion. He started small, knowing Eleanor's fear of the basement. He waited until she was in the kitchen, then went down and lightly tapped the old steam pipes with a wrench at irregular intervals, a slow, dripping ping, ping, ping that echoed up through the floorboards. He heard her footsteps stop above him. He then used a length of fishing line, rigged earlier, to make the basement door latch rattle gently in its frame. That evening, as Eleanor sat in her armchair knitting, Marcus was in the attic. He had found an old, unused chimney flue that passed behind the living room wall. He dropped a handful of fine, grey ash from the fireplace down the chute. It whispered down the brick channel, a soft, spectral sigh, before drifting out into the living room like a faint, ghostly exhalation. Eleanor dropped her knitting. "Who's there?" she called, her voice thin. The next day, he moved the angel figurine a quarter inch to the left. When she came to dust it, her hand froze. She stared at it, her face pale. She carefully centered it again, her fingers trembling. The culmination came on the fourth night. Using his mechanic skills, he tampered with the old wiring in the hallway, creating a short that would cause the lights to flicker in a specific sequence when a particular switch was thrown. He then waited until after midnight. He put on a dark, heavy coat, visual bulk in the shadows, and stood perfectly still at the far end of the second-floor hallway, where a street lamp cast a dim, shifting pattern of light through a tree outside. He threw the switch. The lights flickered wildly, strobe-like. Eleanor, unable to sleep, came out of her room. She saw the dark, tall figure at the end of the hall. In the chaotic light, it looked impossibly tall, featureless. "Marcus," she quavered, "is that you? Stop this." He remained stature still. The lights died, plunging the hall into near darkness save for the erratic street lamp glow. In that moment, Marcus whispered, low and distorted, the name he'd read in the old papers, Lidio. Eleanor let out a choked gasp. He heard her stagger back into her room and lock the door. He didn't move for a full hour, listening to her muffled sobs. The effect was catastrophic and immediate. Eleanor, the unflappable tyrant, crumbled. She became a nervous, jumpy ghost of her former self. She refused to leave her room during the day unless Harold was home. She started talking to herself, muttering about the woman in the walls, and the captain's in the community. Pillar was now a reclusive, eccentric old woman. Harold was bewildered and concerned, talking about doctors and therapists. Eleanor refused. Marcus watched, a cold satisfaction warring with the pang of guilt. He had not laid a hand on her, yet he had broken her more completely than she had ever broken him. He held the power now. The shadows he had manipulated were now her jailers. One frigid night in December, with Harold asleep downstairs after trying to calm his agitated wife, Marcus went to Eleanor's room. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the moonlit lawn. She flinched but didn't turn. "I know it was you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I know it was you," he echoed, his voice calm. For 2 years, she finally looked at him. The hawk-like sharpness was gone, replaced by a hollow, animal fear. "What do you want?" "I want you to tell Harold the truth. Everything. The words. The locks, the spoon, the belt, the cane, the beating in the hall. All of it. He'll never believe you." "He might not, but he'll believe you," Marcus said. "And if you don't, The haunting will get worse. Lydia is very restless. He saw the terror flash in her eyes, the history of the house, her own guilt, and his psychological warfare had woven a trap she couldn't escape. And then, she breathed, "And then I leave. You'll never see me again. You can have your house, and your husband, and your perfect, empty life. But the truth will be out. It will live between you and him, forever. That's your punishment." 2 days later, Harold called Marcus into the study. His face was ashen, aged a decade in 48 hours. Eleanor sat in a wing-back chair, looking small and utterly broken. She would not meet Marcus's eyes. "Son," Harold began, his voice cracking, "Eleanor has told me some things." He struggled for words. A man whose world of balance sheets and logical outcomes had just been vaporized. "She says she hurt you. That she said terrible things. Is this true?" Marcus looked at Eleanor, then back at his father. He slowly unbuttoned his shirt, turning to show the faint, silvery trails of scars that crisscrossed his back. Harold made a sound like he'd been punched. Tears filled his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, agony in every word. "You were happy," Marcus said simply, the full weight of that sacrifice finally audible. "And I didn't think you'd believe me." The evidence was crushed. The confession, witnessed and undeniable, changed everything and nothing. Harold was devastated, torn between loyalty to a monstrous wife and guilt for a betrayed son. The marriage, built on a foundation of Eleanor's performance, collapsed into rubble. Harold moved into a hotel, then a small apartment. He could not look at Eleanor, nor could he forgive himself. Marcus packed his few belongings. On his last day in the old Victorian, he stood in the foyer. Eleanor watched him from the doorway to the parlour, a spectre in her own home. "The house is yours," he said, "and its shadows." As he drove away, the winter sun glinting off the peeling paint of the turrets. He didn't feel triumph. He felt weary to his bones. He had used the house's darkness to fight darkness, and some of it had clung to him. He knew he would carry the scars, inside and out, for the rest of his life. But in his rearview mirror, the windows of the old house no longer looked like empty eyes. They looked like the eyes of a starving beast, finally left with only its intended prey, locked together in a silent, haunted dance. Eleanor Hargrove had inherited the house, but Marcus, in the end, had escaped its deeper shadows.